Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm so excited because Victoria Moran is in the house. We have a living legend on the show. Victoria is an incredible pioneer, and I've been very lucky to have become friends with Victoria over the past 6 years when she got up at 6:30 in the morning to do an interview with me for my book back in the day, Vegan Ventures. And I just found out she's got up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do another interview with a good friend of mine, also in Australia. But she's really someone who embodies everything that she teaches, and she really walks her talk. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation because last year, Victoria and I were hanging out in New York. And we got thrown out of a cafe, not because we did anything wrong, but because we would just chat for hours because she's just so inspiring to be around. And the owners had to politely ask us to leave so that they could close up and go home. So I'm really excited about sharing a conversation with Victoria today, as I know you're going to get a lot from it. So I'm just going to read Victoria's bios to introduce you to those of you who don't know or don't know as much about Victoria. At the age of 14, Victoria Moran covered a Beatles press conference for a teen magazine. That sparked an illustrious career as a writer, best-selling author, and inspirational speaker. A vegan of 37 years, Victoria's college thesis, Compassion, the Ultimate Ethic, published back in 1985, was the first work on vegan philosophy and practice to come from a major publisher. She's the author of an additional 13 or so books, including the best-selling Creating a Charmed Life, The Love-Powered Diet, which reflects on her own struggles with and recovery from compulsive eating, Shelter for the Spirit, Younger by the Day, The Good Karma Diet, Main Street Vegan, and more. Victoria has appeared on Oprah twice, as well as Good Morning America and many other media outlets, and is the host of the award-winning Main Street Vegan podcast on Unity Radio. Since 2012, Victoria has run the Main Street Vegan Academy in New York, which teaches people to become certified vegan lifestyle coaches and run their own businesses. Her latest role is lead producer of Thomas Wade Jackson's wonderful documentary, A Prayer for Compassion, which introduces vegan living to people of faith. Victoria, welcome to the show.
Hey, Katrina, it's great to be here. You talked about that cafe. I remember you and the tea and the vegan scones. It was so lovely.
It was absolutely amazing. And I remember feeling very uplifted after that encounter, as I always do with you, because as I say, you really are someone that walks your talk and, really embodies positivity, vibrancy. And I think you really are a leading light and vegan leader in the movement. So I'm delighted to have a chat with you. So look, I'm going to kick off with, first of all, because I know people that don't know the story are going to be really curious. Tell us about that first time at age 14, you got press credentials to go to the Beatles press conference. I guess it's sort of been in the 60s, and you met Paul McCartney. Tell us that story. How did that happen?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was not a very popular kid. I wasn't pretty or any of that stuff, but I really believed that I was supposed to live this charmed life. And so I went for it. When the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, I was very impressed. And so you could get a press card for $1 from Teen Life magazine. Lots of little girls had them, but I took mine very seriously. So when it was added on to their first U.S. tour that they would come to my hometown of Kansas City, I had gotten together with my editor in New York. She had contacted the press agent for the Beatles. I had the official invitation letter. It was all signed and sealed. And I showed up at the hotel, and there were guards there who said, nope, the rules are no teenagers on the elevator. So I tried to call the editor. We weren't able to get hold of anybody. And then the man who brought the Beatles to Kansas City, his name was Charlie Finley. He owned the baseball team in Kansas City at that time, showed up with a Playboy bunny on his arm. This was 1964, so we're talking historic. And I went up to him and I said, Mr. Finley, it is so wonderful that you've brought the Beatles here. Here's my letter. Here's my press card. I'm supposed to be there. And he looked me up and down and he said, okay, just don't say anything. So Playboy bunny on his right arm and 14-year-old kind of homely kid on his left.
Wow.
And up we go to this incredible experience of getting to be in the room and be privy to the humor and just the delightfulness of these four young men who were in the process of really changing the culture. You know, people talk about the 60s. No, it was the Beatles on. Before the Beatles, it was still the 50s. So that was an incredible experience, and I continued to use that press card, and I met most of the rock groups of that era, got into another Beatles press conference in Toronto the following summer, and then ultimately befriended one of their roadies, and he took me to a club in London and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." And we walked and walked and walked, and it was dark and smoky, you know, in those days. And there was Paul McCartney. And we were introduced, and Paul said, "Hello, Vicky." And I thought, okay, I can die now. I'm only 17, but it's been a grand life.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. I love that. I know I've heard you say it once and you've probably told it a lot of times, but you tell it with such passion, like it happened yesterday. You know, I love
Well,
that.
there's something spectacular about life when you live it consciously. I was thinking about it today because it's very easy to get discouraged and to look at where we haven't achieved the things that we thought we were supposed to, or this should have happened, or that should have happened. But when I honestly can look at my life, you know, even going way back, but also continuing on through, spectacular things have happened and continue to happen. And there's nothing special about me except that I expect that kind of a life. And I know there's a line, I think it's in A Course in Miracles, which I've never read, but I've heard the quotation that says, if you knew who walked beside you through every day of this life that you've chosen, you would never be afraid. And I wish I could say I was never afraid. That would not be true. But I do have a sense that there's something really special going on here, and I'm just really grateful to be a part of it.
I love that. And I noticed on your website, you said that you love a particular line from the vintage movie Auntie Mame, which is
Oh.
life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death. I'm sure that sounds way better in an American accent. Maybe I'll try. Life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death. Maybe that was a bit better. I don't know.
Ooh, well done.
Tell us about that quote. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, Auntie Mame is kind of my guru. And she didn't really exist. She was a composite of people in the life of the author of the book Auntie Mame, Patrick Dennis. But in the book, in the film, she actually lived at a particular street address in New York City, number 3 Beekman Place. And I have honestly gone there and stood in front of the door just to get that energy, even though she never lived. But you know, Santa Claus and all these other beings that we're so familiar with. I mean, we know them, we recognize them on the street, in the department stores. So sometimes there's something very special about people who are fictional or quasi-fictional. But in the film, Auntie Mame is a flapper. It's the 1920s. She's very avant-garde. She's into all sorts of intellectual and spiritual kinds of pursuits that are highly unusual. And she inherits her orphaned nephew, Patrick. And and she tells him, Patrick, life is a banquet, but most poor suckers are starving to death.
Oh, see, it
And
sounds
she
much
also,
better when you say it.
yeah, well, that's because I'm trying to imitate Rosalind Russell. So if
Uh-huh.
anybody wants to see this film, there's a musical. It's called Mame. It's great, Lucille Ball. But I'm talking about the 1958 vintage Rosalind Russell classic. And she'll also say to him, Patrick, your Auntie Mame is going to open doors for you, doors you never even dreamed existed. So I saw this film when I was 7 years old, and I believed it. I believed everything she told him, she was telling me that this was the kind of life that one could claim in good times and bad. And in part of the film, the depression hits and she's lost everything. And she's working as a sales clerk at Macy's and she can't keep the sales book straight, which I completely relate to because I'm terribly unclerical. And she loses that job. And then something utterly magical happens and she just accepts it. It's like, well, yes, of course, I was due for some magic. So yeah, she's a keeper.
Yeah, I love that.
And
So
I
it's
watch
being,
that film about once a year, and there's several
ah,
like that. I mean, I live on inspiration. And I have to feed myself inspiration. I get it from films and books and songs with words and musical theater and theater when we're not having COVID. But sometimes, the best nights I'll have with my husband, or we just listen to songs on YouTube, just various songs, because whether it's musical theater or country or gospel or classic rock or wherever it comes from, there's just so much out there that is designed to lift us up and make us inspired. And I just eat that stuff up.
I love that. I agree. And I would do that as well. I've got like on my playlist on I found I've got one called Positive Uplifting, and I put songs
Ooh.
into there so that I can,
Oh.
whenever I need, so I can get that instant hit. But I love
Ooh, I hope
that.
well, if you would be willing to share that, I
Yeah,
would
of course.
love
Of
to see
course. I'm
it.
sure we could do some swapsies. But I love that you've touched on that, the whole about living consciously and looking for the good despite, lots of, awful things happening around the world. Now, spirituality has obviously been a big part of your life. And I know that you're very well known in the vegan community for your work in that area, your books in that area. But you know what, some people may not know is you've got these amazing books that are in the area of both personal development and spirituality. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that. How did it come into your life? What does it mean to you, and what benefits do you get from it?
Yeah, well, before I knew Auntie Mame, I actually had my own Auntie Mame. It was a grandmother-aged woman named Dee Dee, and she had been interested in theosophy and Rosicrucianism and Christian Science, all kinds of things, back in the day, and showed up in my home when I was really still an infant. And she was truly like a soulmate. I mean, I just hung on her every word. I believe that she knew all the secrets of life. She was the first person to let me know that there were vegetarians in the world at age 5. That was an important seed that was planted. And so for me, I've always been more comfortable in the realm of the spirit. My earliest memory in this connection was when I wasn't quite 3 years old, because we moved on my 3rd birthday. That's how I know I wasn't 3 yet. But I was in my stroller and Dee Dee had me out at night. And I don't know why we were out taking a walk at night. Maybe my parents were having an argument. I don't know. But I remember being in this stroller and looking up at the stars and thinking very rationally in my not quite 3-year-old brain, that's home. I'm here
Wow.
now.
Wow.
I'm doing this. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is not home. And I think I just kind of accepted that I was going to do this life on earth and give it my best shot, but still with the understanding that there's more. And I don't know what it all is, obviously, but it certainly led me to a lot of seeking and reading and studying. And just during COVID, I mean, in fact, it was day before yesterday, I was graduated as a yoga teacher. Now, I started
Oh,
doing
yes.
yoga 52 years ago, but I took this teacher training course just now, and it's been magnificent. Just what one can get by following these paths that fascinate us. And this certainly is one that fascinates me, probably fascinates me the most. And so these past 4 months, despite COVID and all the other things that are going on, I was able to immerse myself in this beautiful spiritual philosophy that, of course, also lets me bring my body to be part of it, which is just like, this is so good. So yeah, it's always been part of it for me, and even as veganism, when I wrote that first book, it was my college thesis. I was getting my bachelor's degree in comparative religions, and I earned a fellowship for foreign studies, so I could study anything at all as long as I left North America to do it. So I went to the UK to study vegans because there were more of them, and it was a smaller landmass. Very different time. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking 1980, 81, and there just weren't a lot of vegans, but those that we did have were mostly in the UK and also Ireland. So that's where I went.
Amazing. So how is it? I'm curious how it's helped you, because I know you mentioned like you've written the book called Creating a Charmed Life, and I think that
Hmm.
a revised version came out called Living a Charmed Life. And I guess, you know, when people looking at the outside in, it looks like you've led a charmed life, but obviously, you know, there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of difficult
Hmm.
times. And I mean, I believe you brought your daughter Adair up as a single mother
Hmm.
for many years. So I mean, were there any particular times in your life where you've really kind of felt like spirituality has been like your bedrock or has saved
Oh,
you almost?
just about all the time. Because sometimes, you know, when you have those big tragedies, I mean, Lord knows they're awful to go through. They're enormous, and yet you get this added strength. You know, something just comes to kind of bolster people through these kinds of times. And then, of course, you know, people gather around and everybody's there to help. But with the annoyances of day to day, you don't seem to get any kind of help. So sometimes I really find that the spirituality is most helpful, the spiritual tools and techniques, and just remembering that in my view, that you and I and all of us and all of this, it has meaning, it has purpose, it's not random, and that we're supposed to do something with this. You know, we're not here just to look at what's going on around us and be buffeted about by good days and bad days and good weather and not so good weather and up market and down market and all that stuff. You know, we're here for something beyond that, and that is kind of the stage setting, and it changes. It changes all the time. So to get to that serene place, and you know, I have not even come close, although I feel like now that I've had this yoga training course, I'm really focused on some of the tools to do that, because regardless of all the other stuff, you know, the other magical things that happen in life, they come in these sort of spurts. You know, you're going along and it's life and it's life and it's life and it has its ups, it has its downs, and then you get ta-da, and you're going along, and then, you know, a year or two, whatever, you get ta-da again. So you can either like live waiting for the next one of those, or you can just see the delight in everything, which I think actually invites more of the tadas and maybe makes them a little bit closer together. So for me, the
But how does that
things,
work, though, Victoria, when something really tragic happens in your
oh,
life? Do you know what I
you
mean? Like you're,
suffer.
yeah, and you've got the grief and everything. Like
Yeah.
how do you go from that kind of depth to the appreciation, looking at the gift? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if someone loses someone, you're not going to kind of say to them, "Oh, you'll see the gift soon." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
How
no.
does that work?
Well, and that is when the big stuff, and for me, my first husband committed suicide. That's how I got to be a single mother. And certainly all death is awful, but that particular kind of death is really, really, it's not right. There's nowhere you can put it. And so it was a very, 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 very difficult time, and it took years, you know, certainly I would say 4 years really, to feel like you're never over something like that completely, but 4 years to feel like, okay, I've got my bearings. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because that's how long it takes to get a degree. You have to study yourself and life, and grief is a process. I don't know if you get better at it when you've done it more than once, but it's a process with its own time frame, and it's healing. It's beneficent. It just doesn't feel like that at the time because it takes you into all these feelings. So I do have a story from that time in my life, though, that I think really shows how you can still have that little spark of, even in bleakest times, there's this little light. There's this little light. And so shortly after Patrick died, my mother came and stayed, and lots of friends were around, and people were there, and they brought pies. And, it was just all kind of happening in front of my face, and I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to the details. But after everybody left except my mom, I was sitting one afternoon on a rocking chair, and I found that I did a lot of that. And actually, I was told later by a therapist that rocking brings on the grief so that you can experience it. If you're having a quiet time when you could grieve, you just rock and it'll bring it on. So I was doing a lot of rocking. And I remembered that I had read something a few months before that you could get one of these round the world tickets, and it was quite reasonably priced for what you got, and it lasted 6 months, and as long as you just went in one direction, and you could even have one backtrack, you could just keep on going. And I remember thinking, when that memory showed up, what is wrong with you? I mean, here you are, you're all alone in the world, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're thinking about going around the world. But then it just stayed with me. And I started thinking, what an amazing gift that would be for my daughter, who was 4 at the time, before she goes to school, to really see the world and see that not everybody lives the way we live and does things, the way we do them. So it started to seem like a very good idea. And I wanted to tell somebody that I'd had this brilliant idea, and there was only one person there, and it was my mom. And I said, Mom, I just remembered these ads. Do you know that you can get this round the world ticket, and you can be gone 6 months as long as you go in one direction and you get one backtrack? And wouldn't it be amazing to give to Rachel Adair before she starts school? And my mother took off her apron, because there are some things that are so serious you cannot say them while wearing an apron. And she said to me, you are alone in the world with a little girl. Hasn't even this taken the wind out of your sails? And I thought, oh, wow, she's right. This is stupid. Why did I even tell anybody? I felt stupid thinking it. Now I've told somebody, and I said, oh, yeah, you're right. It's just the grief. I'm just crazy. Just don't forget I ever said it. But as I sat there, I thought, you know what? If the wind permanently were to come out of my sails, then that little girl over there in Montessori preschool may as well have 2 dead parents, because the one she's got wouldn't be worth much. And so I filed that idea away, and we weren't able to do it right then and there. But when she was 8 years old, we did it the first time. And when she was 10, we did it again.
Wow.
And it's even in those dark times, you've almost got to let the light, the possibilities kind of come in through a crawl space when you've closed all the doors and windows. That life is often hard, and yet there's some magic in there somewhere. It's like the old story about the little boy who's shoveling manure in a barn, and somebody says to him, "This is terrible work that you're doing. Why are you so happy?" And he says, "Well, with all this manure, there has to be a pony in here somewhere." And I think that's a great way to look at life. I'm not saying that I'm always able to do it, but when I can remember, it's sure better than looking at life the other way.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that's obviously incredibly challenging love. I really appreciate you putting that perspective on it, because that could be a time of something that happens to someone where someone just goes, they lose their faith and can go completely the opposite direction. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And just, I guess, on spirituality, it's an interesting one, because I've had an interest in that kind of thing, and I used to go to, I think the bookshop, is it called Watkins, I think, in London, the
Yes,
big one.
oh, I
So I
love
used to love
Watkins.
going in all of that, and I kind of I go in to and fro with things like spirituality, particularly in activist circles. It can be quite criticized and poo-pooed, like, oh, it's too woo-woo, why are you believing in these angels or God or all of this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
it's unscientific. And also sometimes it's kind of like the personal development world, the spiritual world, they say, doesn't take into account people's privilege or lack of it. So I'm curious, what do you think of that? Because I'm very drawn to spirituality. I've got oracle cards here, and I think some people might think, oh, they didn't know that of me, because I maybe don't come across that way. And then sometimes I'll see a critique of it, and then I'll I'll fluctuate a little bit. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you I guess, how do you respond to those kind of
Yeah.
critiques?
Well, number one, I stay out of them because I was an animal rights activist before the term animal rights was coined. And so I see all of this anger and infighting and people getting so snippy about all sorts of things. And I don't have time for that. I'm 70 years old. I don't know how long I have on this earth. I'm not going to spend it worrying about, what some fellow animal advocate thinks about me. I'm glad they're an animal advocate, and I'm going to do it my way. So I could no more give up my spirituality than I could give up my veganism. And I know that in giving up veganism, a lot of animals would be harmed, and that would be a terrible, terrible thing. But I feel that to give up my spirituality, my my myself would be gone, my real true essence. And I also don't know that I would have a heart for animals as I do were it not for this spiritual connection. Because to me, the strong, deep belief that I have that every living being is an expression of the divine, that we really are connected in this incredible mystical union. I mean, this was why I wrote that book about veganism as part of my course in comparative religions, because it's very much part of it. And until recently, it was very much part of the spread of vegetarianism and veganism. I teach the course on vegetarian history for Main Street Vegan Academy, and it's utterly fascinating to me that first you had the UK India connection. It was first trade and then became colonization. But through all of that, there was this exchange of ideas, exchange of cultural ideas. And so everyone who could read English started learning about vegetarianism and reincarnation and some of these other ideas, and they really came very much packaged together. But what a lot of people also don't know is that there is a tremendous spiritual and philosophical Western history of vegetarianism and veganism. I mean, we know that Pythagoras is called the father of vegetarianism, but most people don't know that to study with him, either philosophy or math or athletics, you had to do a 40-day fast and then become what we would now call a raw food vegan, because he thought that people just didn't have the bandwidth to take on these incredible ideas that he had to impart if they weren't eating in this way. And another thing that a lot of people don't know is that after the time of the historical Jesus, those early Christians a very, very high percentage of them were vegetarians and probably vegans, because in that kind of system, what are you going to do with the the boy calves if you're vegetarian? So they were probably vegan. I know some scholars will go all the way to say they were vegan. We certainly know that they were vegetarian in large numbers, enough so that Paul in the Bible kind of got annoyed with it. It's just like, all right, already, just stop talking so much about your diet. We've got these more important things to talk about. But then, of course, to all of us who are vegan, it's very important.
Yeah.
And so for all these years, whether you're looking east or west, there is this strong spiritual and even religious push for vegetarianism and even coming into veganism. So I don't see any contrast. And I also know that not everybody's into this stuff. Some people are they're atheists, they're humanists, they're however life makes sense to them. And every atheist that I personally know is so ethical and so cool, and I love them to pieces. And the truth is, it's very arrogant for any of us to say, oh, I absolutely know how it is. We don't know.
Yeah.
And yet I know what it takes to make my life feel fulfilled and complete. And that's how I'm going to live it.
I love that. I love that. You've inspired me around that. Thank you. That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned you were vegetarian from a young age, certainly through the 60s, and you're in your teens. Then you developed an eating disorder. You had binge eating, compulsive eating, obesity. And then only after you'd recovered from that, you became vegan. Talk to us a little bit about the eating disorder. Like, how did that come about? How and when did that start?
I'd always had it. I can't even remember when I didn't have it. And my dad was a diet doctor. And at one point, he and my mom opened a thing called a reducing salon, which was kind of a precursor to health clubs with belts and rollers. And people, mostly women, went in with the idea that if they were sufficiently jostled, great chunks of themselves would fall away. But, I did it, and I didn't change me. So I was this overweight child, bad for business. I was very aware that, my dad had these patients coming to him to lose weight. And then if they saw me, it was, didn't help. So there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of dieting. And I just swore that as soon as I was old enough that my parents couldn't tell me what to do, I would never diet again. But of course, that time came in adolescence, and then I put myself on worse diets than they had come up with. So this kind of diet binge cycle started for me in childhood. And I did everything that I thought you were supposed to do, but I thought the problem was the food. And that's part of the problem. I mean, certainly what we think of as the standard Western diet, I think it's better now because more people are eating more produce and better food. But certainly at that time, and even today, a lot of people eat food that's just terribly processed. It's designed to make you hungry, want to eat more. It also doesn't have enough nutrients, so you're kind of starving at a cellular level. So that's all part of it too. But for me, I think that I was really eating to fill an emptiness inside. And again, since we talked about spirituality, I'll do the Pascal quote, which is, and you can take the man out and make it humans, but the way he said it was, there is a God-shaped hole in every man that only God can fill. And I know that people fill that hole with all sorts of activities and substances, but food makes so much sense because if you feel that the hole is right about its stomach level, why not just put more food in there? But it really got to the point where there just wasn't enough food and the hole kept getting bigger. So I had, there's a line in the Alcoholics Anonymous big book about people who have sobered up for a while and then gone back to drinking and done that periodically. And the phrase they use is pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And that's how it was for me. It was pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I never became like morbidly obese. I mean, 60 pounds overweight was as big as I ever got, but that was because I was always doing this, you know, losing and gaining weight. I'd live really fast. You know, I'd lose weight. I'd feel like I was acceptable, and I would go out and see people and do things knowing, it was like being pursued, knowing that this was not going to last. And then I would be back, you know, in the cave with the food and the self-hatred. So, managed to stay vegetarian. I went vegetarian at 19. But the vegan thing, it was just very difficult. I heard about it, maybe I was 20, I think I was 20 when I heard of it, and it made perfect sense from the very beginning, even though it was extremely weird then. I mean, people, even vegetarian was weird. So vegan was just like, what? Won't you die? Won't you starve? Or, you know, in my case, because weight was an issue, it's like, oh my God, all those carbs, you know, you'll just become huge. And so there were all these negative messages about it, but I still knew it was the right thing. In my heart, I knew it was the right thing, but I couldn't do it because I couldn't have choice over time about what I would eat because I was an addict. And I realized not everybody with food or weight issues becomes an addict. I did. And so addicts can't just say, all right, that's it, I'm done. You know, they need more. So what happened for me, gracefully, was that my daughter had been born, and I looked down at her in her crib, and I just wanted to raise her vegan, but I knew I had to be vegan myself. And I just got very serious about Overeaters Anonymous and just did what they said to do. And that's basically a spiritual program. So, you know, one more point in my life for practical spirituality. And
Nice.
again, you know, very eclectic. I mean, I don't like when people tell me, and I'm sure nobody likes being told, well, this is it. Now, here's the truth. Here's what you're supposed to believe. You know, here are the tenets and the precepts. Take it. I mean, nobody wants that. But for me, this whole idea, it's being open, if you want it, to those aspects that nurture you and that change your life. And in all honesty, I mean, that 12-step program changed my life. I mean, 180, a day at a time for 37 years. It's just not the same life as it was.
Yeah.
So I did raise my daughter vegan, and it's all pretty wonderful.
So do you still, is it like, you know, with NA or AA, do you still like go to meetings? Like, do you still consider yourself an addict and go to meetings, or do you feel like you did the work back then and, you know, you've got it nailed now and you'll never go back, kind of thing?
Well, I would never say never, because I am an addict. And the way it appears to work is that to stay free of an addiction, you need to maintain a modicum of what in the 12 steps they call fit spiritual condition. Now, I can tell you it does not have to be spectacular spiritual condition because I have certainly been in not spectacular spiritual condition lots of times over the last 37 years. But enough of a connection to this inner power. And again, it's all very personal, you know, whether you think of it as traditional God or the light within, or, you know, whatever works. Some kind of connection to that power that has your back seems to be sufficient. And I believe that if I were to lose that, give up on that, turn my back on that, or whatever, I wouldn't take up some whole new addiction. I mean, I don't think I would start going to casinos or something, but I would go back to the food because it's just how I'm wired.
Mm.
So do I go to meetings? I do, not terribly often. I go a couple times a month probably now. I do sponsor somebody, so I talk with that person once a week, and that keeps me together and keeps me grounded too. So there are a lot of reasons for me to go when I do go, and that's because I get growth out of it. I get help,
Nice.
I get strength, and I rarely feel that I'm at all close to overeating. I mean, maybe once or twice a year. There are still a few foods that I completely keep out of my house. I just will not have chocolate silk soy milk. I don't know why. I have the other kind of silk soy milk, and I have dark chocolate bars in there. It's not a problem, but there's something about that chocolate silk soy milk sings to me. There are certain brands of vegan cheese that sing to me because dairy cheese was my biggest binge food. So many people will say, "Oh, sweets." Well, I like those fine. But cheese, I mean, big chunks, huge amounts of
Mm.
cheese. And so for me, there's something about that sour, salty, umami cheesiness that even when it's vegan, I've got to be careful. So there are a few
Yeah.
brands I just don't have. And other than that, I just live my life. And
Amazing.
I think it's
Amazing.
also good to go to meetings so that new people won't think that people just get well and leave.
Nice. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think this is going to be so helpful for people watching or listening. Let's talk about aging, because as you said, you're 70, you're quite happy to say you're not someone who hides your age. You're an incredible role model for older people. But I'm curious, I noticed in one of your books, Younger by the Day, I think it was called, it explores the question, why do some women, and I guess this could apply to men and women, but why do some women blossom with age while others wither? In a nutshell, I know there's a whole book about it, and we'll put a link to your Amazon page. In a nutshell, what's the answer to that? Why do some people or some women really kind of blossom with age, such as yourself, and others don't? Because aging's it's a thing. I mean, I'm 54
Yeah.
now, and it does feel a little bit strange. Like when I go, oh, I'm 50. Like when I say, oh, I'm 54, it feels a little bit weird because I guess we've got stereotypes from when we were younger of what 50 looked like, what 60 looked like, and of course it
Yeah.
doesn't. Do you know what I mean? Like 70 did not look like you when I was a child. It was like the blue rinse. But it is kind of an interesting process. So I'm curious about your experience of aging, and yes, why do some people really kind of blossom, and it's a wonderful experience
Yeah.
versus
Well, I think it's a decision, and it's almost a warrior decision because our culture does not like older people, and I would say particularly older women.
yeah
There's a discomfort, and I think what happens particularly with women is that we come into a sense of power right around 50 that we didn't have before. And so as long as you're healthy, there's nothing you can't do. And I think that's just very scary to certain patriarchal influences.
yes
So I think the reason that some women blossom, well, certainly health is a big part of it. And I'm not one of those like shaming plant-based people because good Lord, this is Earth and things happen. I mean, anything can happen to anybody at any day. And this idea of, oh, I do so well because I'm so healthy. It's like I'm blessed to be healthy. I take care of myself as best I can, but it's not like, oh, I'm doing well at 70 because I do everything right and somebody else doesn't. That is just crap. So what I think it is this decision to stay here. Like I talked in my little story when I was 3 that I made this decision to stay here and do Earth. And I think that decision has to be made fairly frequently when you get to be older, especially living in a youth culture, because it would be so easy to just say, well, I'm going to fade and let other people be out there doing all the stuff because that's what society wants. They don't know what to do with older women who refuse to stop speaking up. So you just do it anyway. And I think it's so important to have role models. I remember one when I was working at the Theosophical Society and I was 20, her name was Iris. And I was complaining about, I don't know, papers or photocopies, something really important. And she was probably in her early 80s, and she looked at me with the most beautiful smile and she said, "The darling physical plane." And, as a longtime theosophist, those were the kind of words she used. But basically, she was just saying, life on Earth is messy. And so we just deal with it. So she's been a really important role model to me. There are people in this movement that Freya Dinshaw, for example. Freya Dinshaw married Jay Dinshaw when he had just founded the American Vegan Society in 1960. Freya was living in London, and they were pen pals. And she came to this country sight unseen. She'd never met this man. She came over here at 18 and married him.
Wow.
They built the American Vegan Society, and in this country, they were it for vegans for 20 years. PETA happened in 1980, but from 1960 to 1980, with some other stuff, farm animal rights movement happened there in the 70s. But basically, it was Freya and Jay carrying that torchlight of veganism. And I was talking to her not long ago and said, "How are you doing with the aging thing?" Because, she's somewhat older than me. And she said, "Well, I've decided to retire at 86. Like 10 years from now. And it's like, good plan. And that inspired me so much, because I think what happens, the body is kind of letting go of Earth. Not that we're not all going to live to be 102, but even with that, it kind of starts to let go of Earth. And so this feeling that people get about wanting to work less, or wanting to retire, or just wanting to, let it all go. In addition to the societal pressures from a youth culture, there's this internal pressure of the body and the mind that doesn't want to be out there like it used to be. But if you have a mission, then you have to be out there whether your body and brain want to be out there or not. I mean, you have to rest, you have to, pace yourself. It's not like you're doing all-nighters because, there's some campaign you're excited about, but you've still got to psych yourself up to show up. And this is what I know as of today. I teach this class sometimes called When I'm 64, something like, plant-based living for slow motion aging or something. And now, of course, it's back when I was 64, but I still name it for the Beatles song. But I was teaching it several years ago, and I think I was 62 or something. And a woman was there with her mother, and her mother was in her 80s. And the mother leaned over to the daughter and said, "How can she teach this class? She's only 62. And, in our culture, only doesn't usually go before 62. But I got it, because I don't know what it's like to be 80. I don't know what it's like to be 75. I just know what it's like to live today to the best of my ability. And I hope that, God willing, I'm here at 75, I'm here at 80. I'll be doing the same thing, probably with just a few more lines in my face."
No, I love that. How do you feel about having work done, or surgery, or the grey hair movement, for example? And I say this sitting here, I have Tracy does my roots for me, and they need doing at the moment, which I'm conscious. But I'm just curious, because there's that whole thing about, well, let's, embrace the crone, the inner crone, don't worry about, dyeing your hair, or, maybe have a few fillers or the Botox or the cosmetic surgery. And there's no judgment. I'm not passing any judgment here. I'm just curious, what's your take on that? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's personal. How do you want to do it? It's like so many other things. It's like when you're young. How are you going to do life? Are you going to go to college? Are you going to join the military? How are you going to do it? And now, at this other end of life, we should know even more how we want to do it. And I think some of it is personal culture. I mean, my mother, my grandmother, they all dyed their hair. My mother died at 87. She had perfect nails, perfect hair. I mean, that's her. And so I think some of that maybe is rubbed off on me. So I cover my gray, with a Veda, and hopefully it's not doing terrible things to me. And there may be some time when I just think, you know what, I'm done. I think I'm done with haircuts. Yes, because of COVID. The idea, I mean, I had high maintenance hair, and I got it blown dry like every 5 days because I'm a terrible blow dryer and I couldn't make it look fabulous. And there was a lot of, like hair work going on. And now I've realized, God, you just let it get a little bit longer and you put it up in the Audrey Hepburn French twist. I mean, this is fantastic. So, some things change, maybe not forever. And then in terms of getting work done, I mean, in all honesty, if I had more money, I would get stuff done. I mean, it's like I wouldn't want to be, like the cat woman who has 157 procedures, but I don't see anything wrong with it. And I also don't see why it should have to happen. It's like I knew a woman who wrote a book called How Not to Look Old, and she really didn't want to look old. And I remember her saying to me once, there is just no excuse this day and age for anyone to have lines in their face.
Wow.
And it was just like, I can't even begin to talk about how much I disagree with that. Whew. So it's anybody's call. And and some women, they talk about how I've earned every line. I love these lines. Well, I don't mind some of mine. There's a couple of them I wish weren't there. Uh, but you live in your life as you are. And one of the other things that I see from being this age is I've never been a big proponent of that secret thing of, you think and then stuff happens. But I do think that what you do, what you build, is what you kind of end up with. And so I've been very invested in having this life that was really focused on this cause that I believe in, this cause of animal rights, and that also allowed me a lot of life. Having a child and raising her, and travel and study and just richness. And I never paid a lot of attention to anything like having some corporate job with a pension or,
Yeah.
starting to invest in my 20s or something like that. So I didn't do that stuff. And so here I am now, wishing that I could have a nip and a tuck, but there are other things that are, more priorities.
Yeah, got it.
So,
No, it's good. It's nice to get different perspectives, and you're right. I think as long as
Yeah.
you're doing it like you say, if you're not doing it just constantly, like you said, like the Rosalind, whatever her name is, the Catwoman, Wilden's who's the Catwoman, you're kind of doing it from that deep place of insecurity and security. And obviously, I think there's some responsibility on her cosmetic surgeons to actually say no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. It's kind of, you're doing it and it just makes you feel better. Then again, it's about that non-judgment, I guess, which is great.
Right.
Great. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but look, I just want to
I just have one more thing on that, if I could, Katrina, that I think where people get into trouble with stuff like that is trying to look younger, because what happens is if the work is good and not too extreme or whatever, you can look better and you can look kind of, I wonder how old she is. It's kind of like, you don't think she's 30. I mean, it's like that, you can't do that. And you don't want to. And one thing that I share when I do that, when I'm 64 talk, is a picture. It was a Vogue magazine cover from maybe 10 years ago. And it was the widow of Elvis Presley and their daughter and the granddaughter. And the way they had all been airbrushed and done up, and everybody looked the same age. They looked like three women of 30. And it's like, this is just too weird. Let's just go on and go forward. And if, you want to do a little something, God bless you that you thought ahead and planned for it.
I love that. I told this story. I interviewed Alexandra Paul recently, and we were talking about something. And I said that in my last set of professional photos, not the ones that are on the website now, the ones before that, I said to the photographer, airbrush the heck out of it. So we got rid of all the, wrinkles and everything, nothing. So then I would have my pull-up banner at events, and then I would be standing there next to it, and people would and then they'd go, oh, is that you? And I could tell what they were thinking. There was obviously, I looked like about 12 on this banner. And then they were seeing me in real life. So I learned, I was like, right, I'm not doing that this time. So I'm like, okay, yeah, make the photo look nice, but yeah, make it look natural kind of thing. But I love that. I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions, which are kind of maybe just a couple of sentences max. And they're ones that I ask everyone just to wrap up. What does leadership mean to you, and what style of leader are you?
Oh, I am an aspirational leader, because I think, and again, this is something they say in 12 steps, if you have what somebody else wants, they will go to any length to get it. So
I love that.
That's how I do it.
I love that. Aspirational leader. I love that. What do you love most about yourself?
Oh, that I keep getting up. One of my favorite words is irrepressible, because that's what I strive to be. And certainly there are weekends in sweats with the sofa bed pulled out and lots of Netflix. But most of the time, I strive to be irrepressible, and just no matter what, keep going. And like we've learned this word pivot during COVID. And I think so many of us have gotten so good at it, and there's so many wonderful role models for that. So this is a great time to
I love that. It's a good word
practice
for you,
what I love about myself.
I love that. And just finally, what's been one key lesson that you've learned either about yourself or about life that you would like to share with other vegan women leaders?
Okay. I would say that you have a special mission that's only yours. Nobody who's ever lived could do what you're meant to do in life just the way that you can do it. So if you don't know what this is, figure it out. Figure it out by asking people you trust, by meditation, whatever it's going to take. And once you know what your path is, just get on it. And if you're thinking, but what if it changes? That's fine. Mm-hmm. Then it'll change. Yeah. but just you so have a purpose here that if everybody did their purpose, everything would be taken care of. You know how sometimes in animal rights we're asked, well, why aren't you working for sick children or something else? It's like, if all the people who have a heart for sick children were working for them, and those who want to work for animals, and those who want to work against human trafficking, and those who are working for Black Lives Matter and all that. And certainly this doesn't mean that we can't be interested and supportive of lots of social issues. But your own personal, particular, in yoga they call it dharma, that's yours. Yeah. You do that and you'll be happy with your life.
Oh, I love that. That's such a wonderful way to end on. This has been so lovely, Victoria. As I say, I could just chat with you for hours. I already feel uplifted, and I know that everyone watching or listening to this, I'm sure, will be too. So we'll put a link to your Main Street Vegan website, where there's links to your socials, your Amazon page, where people can find out more about your books, and also, of course, your academy, which I believe you're doing both via Zoom and an elite version in New York next year. So we'll put all that information. I do encourage everyone, check out Victoria's breadth of work. She's an absolutely inspiring, wonderful woman, and really appreciate you joining us today, Victoria. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Katrina. Even without scones, it's always magnificent to talk with you.